Without further ado, I want to introduce Dan Allen, who is the moderator for the Urban Agriculture panel. Dan is the CFO of Farmscape, the largest urban farming venture in Southern California. He possesses extensive knowledge of urban agriculture, otherwise I wouldn't have chosen him as the moderator. You can often find his editorials on Seedstock.com on the state of urban agriculture, and I'll let Dan take it from here.
All right, excellent. Thanks a lot, Robert. I'd like to start by giving 3 of our 4 panelists a chance to introduce themselves, and if and when Rickey shows up, we'll interrupt and give him a chance to introduce himself as well. So to my left is Rachel Surls.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Surls, and I work for the University of California Cooperative Extension Office in Los Angeles County, and I'm the Sustainable Food Systems Advisor. And let me tell you a little bit about Cooperative Extension. We're part of the University of California's Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And we've been around over 100 years working with farmers throughout the state, often to help them adapt to new technologies, be more profitable, stay in business, and reduce their use of inputs and so forth. And in addition to our work with farmers, we also work in nutrition education. We run the 4-H youth development program, and we do a lot around home gardening. We have a program called the Master Gardener Program, lots of volunteers here in Los Angeles, and also Master Food Preserver volunteers who can teach you how to grow and preserve your harvest. So I am fortunate enough to have this new role where I get to work on urban agriculture. I just started this a few months ago. I was an administrator for a number of years prior to that, so I'm dusting off my background in agronomy and agricultural science to work with urban farmers. I've been delving into what the needs are. I've been participating in the Los Angeles Food Policy Council's Urban Agriculture Working Group. That's been really helping me see what's going on locally and where University of California can get involved. And I've also gotten involved in a research project with the University of Wisconsin. They're looking at 8 cities around the country and what urban farmers are actually producing and what kind of management models they're using. So I'm helping to collect data here in Los Angeles. And as part of that project, I've been able to visit some urban farms and see what's going on at the urban farm level. So it's been very exciting, and I'm looking forward to sharing some information about that today.
Great. David?
EVO Farm is a concept that is the mission to try and grow as much food in the least amount of space possible using innovative methods that are not only environmentally sound but financially sustainable as well. We built the first commercial aquaponics system in the county of Los Angeles. Aquaponics, as you may know, it combines hydroponics, growing food in water, and aquaculture, growing fish farming. We've used that system, which, by the way, is really small compared to some other people in this room, Howlings, for example. We use that system to learn how to scale up and to scale down, scaling down to building a product line of kits for people who in balconies or backyards can grow basically all the food they need as far as leafy greens and some of their fruiting crops are concerned in very little space, as well as on the large end is working with commercial growers in the Southlands who are producing large volumes of produce aquaponically.
Excellent. Jesse?
Hi. Can you hear me okay? My name is Jessie Du Bois. I work with Farmscape. Farmscape, as you heard, is the largest urban agriculture venture in California. We design and we install and we also maintain on a weekly basis raised bed gardens using about a foot and a half of soil. And we do that in residential landscapes. We also do it for restaurants. We do it for sometimes businesses, Fortune 500 companies. We're working with developers. And our goal is to turn the city back into a farm, 1 yard and 1 rooftop at a time. Let's see, we've been in business since about 2008. I originally thought I was going to go into screenwriting. I didn't expect to be a farmer. But I got really interested in food. I have a background in cooking. I cooked a lot growing up. I had a food family. I guess I learned what food culture was in like the food movement sense before it was a movement, just from my parents and from having rotating cooking duties. And then I worked in restaurants a little bit after graduating from school and came to firmly believe that the ingredients make the meal. I honestly think that the farmer is the new chef, And the way to get really good flavor, to have the healthiest possible food, and to grow food with the most environmentally responsible way, you have to look at the farming, the process, the backstory of how it's made, and urban agriculture and what we're doing at Farmscape is the full expression of that and how much I care about the farms and getting them closer to people.
Excellent. Thanks, Jesse. I wanted to start with you, Rachel. Jesse and David have new agriculture ventures here in LA County, but of course it's not, agriculture is not at all new to LA County. Can you talk a little bit about the role it's played over the past century and how that's changed?
I would love to. It's a fact that I think was ignored for a long time, but people are starting to talk about it more, that Los Angeles County was actually the biggest farm county in the nation for about 50 years. Maybe a little less than that, but the top county, even looking at Iowa and other big Midwestern states, starting around 1910. And what made Los Angeles agriculture so important was that we had this beautiful 12-month growing season, and we had plenty of land. It was wide open. There were giant ranchos here that were created during the Spanish and Mexican era, and as those broke apart, land became available as the Civil War ended and more people immigrated here and wanted to live in Southern California. And over the years, a large farming empire basically developed here. I mean, we think of Napa Valley now as the largest wine grape center of California, but originally Los Angeles was the wine grape center of California. There were massive fields of wheat and other grains. There were tons of experiments done here on what could be grown. I mean, we had mulberry trees grown for silk culture. We had experimentation with cotton farming. We had all kinds of different fruit and vegetable crops. And, this was well into the 1950s, 1960s. A couple things drove this whole engine of farm development. And one was there's always been sort of a boosterism, a great ringtone, boosterism culture of Los Angeles. Los Angeles has always been sold and promoted, and oftentimes by real estate developers. And one of the things they sold and promoted was that endless sunshine and how you could grow so much and so many different things in LA. So they promoted small farming here, and people moved from the Midwest in droves and started these things they called small farm homes, which were basically 3 to 5 acre farms where people wanted to, make a living as a small independent farmer, helping to feed this growing city. And I think up until the 1930s, maybe about half of the food that people in Los Angeles ate was actually grown in the area around the city. And of course, we don't have that anymore. There was also, in addition to those small farm homes that were more independent, there was always commercial agriculture here, high-value commercial agriculture. So what changed was, World War II and industrialization and the increasing value of land. And really, agriculture has always been a transitional use of land in Los Angeles. As there became a more valuable use of that land, agriculture was pushed out. That trend, accelerated in the 1950s and 1960s. And by 1970, 1980, most of the commercial agriculture in Los Angeles County was up in the high desert around Lancaster and Palmdale. So this is a fascinating discussion today about can we and how can we insert agriculture back into a city where it has, for the most part, left.
That's great. And before we talk too much about the how, I want to talk a little bit about the why we should bring urban agriculture back to Los Angeles. David, we live in a state that produces over half the nation's fruits and nuts and over a quarter of the vegetables. Why would we worry about growing them in an urban setting instead of on some of the sustainable farms that people mentioned in the first panel?
To redefine the definition of what local food means and what a resilient food system means and what food safety means. And Colin touched on many of the points like water issues and how water is a threat against national security. But bringing food closer to home allows you to sort of mitigate other threats against national security. And I think the second after water would be public health. Public health meaning chronic diseases. So if you can bring food closer to people who would potentially know their source, raised sustainably, in a way that actually exceeds organic standards, which aquaponics does, you have a potential to actually reduce the cost to society of what those diseases do. So if you look at heart disease, obesity, diabetes, the sheer dollar value of what those diseases do to our economy is more than enough to bankrupt society on planet Earth as we know it. So what I look at is a local food system is a system that grows food, delivers it in a way that's not measured in miles, but it's measured in feet. And by nature, it actually it's a sustainable model as far as how the fertilizers are generated, because it's the fertilizer comes from the system itself. You're giving other soil in the rest of the world a break, which is well needed because it's been overused. And you're bringing the dollars are generated and spent within walking distance of the farm. So local economic generating tools as well.
Yeah, Jesse, David touched a lot on the social impacts. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on some of the economic impacts you see to bringing food production back to the city?
Yeah, I see both. I'm all with David on a 10-foot food logistics. I think that's better for diets and for lifestyle and health. One of the things that we care a lot about at Farmscape is decommodifying food. The first panel, I'd say, is a little bit different than the way we think at Farmscape, insofar as it's focusing on how to make food as a commodity as cheap as possible and produce it in immense volumes, and they're very technical about it. And at Farmscape, we're also very technical, and we care a lot about our logistics, but we don't sell the food as a commodity, and so we in many ways don't have to think about it that way. We're a service, and we actually sell farms and farming and a farming lifestyle to people who have land either in their yard or somehow nearby on their rooftop. And that's just a totally different experience. You form a connection with your food when you're farming it. You're more interested to eat it. Your children become connected, invested in the vegetables. And that has all kinds of intangibles that matter a lot, even though they're intangible, as far as how you organize your life, how you organize your menu, whether or not you're eating seasonally, whether or not you're going to think about what you need to shop for at the grocery store, and you'll choose your meal first and then go buy the ingredients, or whether you look at your ingredients, take stock of them, and then say, well, that's what's going to inform what I cook tonight. And that's just it's a different and I think better way of living. There's also tangible benefits to growing food nearby. You can, if you set free from the long distance logistics and the large scale mega farming model, even the hydroponic large scale model, you're able to grow food fresher and harvest it fresher when it's within 10 feet or 100 feet or 1,000 feet, and it'll taste better for being fresher. It also lets you grow an expanded catalog of varietals. Most varieties of food that you find retail, they're picked not so much for how they taste. Flavor has mostly been abandoned as a constraint in the way that we source our food or the way that farmers choose what they're going to grow. They're picking food for what's resistant to pests in the big monoculture setting. They're picking food for, they're picking their seed for what will be well packed, what has a long shelf life, what conforms well to the model where you harvest with big machine picking, and you put everything on a truck and you let it ripen on the truck with ethylene gas or over a 2-week span, and then what looks appealing and normal on the supermarket shelf. That's something that we basically trash at Farmscape. We don't have to think about any of those things, and instead we can fully embrace flavor. We can pick varietals that only last 3 days or 5 days after picking. But we know that the people who are members of Farmscape are going to cook that night or within 2 hours of picking that eggplant or that cucumber. So that's a big deal. It's just a different way of embracing a food culture.
That's great. Let's move on a little bit to the how we bring urban agriculture back to the city. David, in the first panel, we heard about a lot of challenges that people face, whether it's regulation or high land prices in an urban setting. What sorts of challenges have you encountered, and how have you dealt with them?
Well, space is the biggest issue, and it's almost cost prohibitive to buy land for a urban farming venture. So the first thing I did actually for our pilot project in Mar Vista, we did a garden swap. We found a property using Google Earth and made a proposal to a landowner who had underutilized space and built a greenhouse on their property at no cost to them, did all the work, cover all expenses, and they get all the food they can eat, and the remaining bounty was for our use, which ends up being like 99% of the bounty because it grows so much food. They just can't eat it. And they can't even make a dent in it. But that's one model. And we're looking at other models too. Farms and schools to me is the greatest opportunity in urban agriculture. The school systems, LAUSD, the large landowners in the city, they also happen to be the largest energy consumers and the largest water users. And isn't there a way possible you can imagine we can kind of combine all of those values that are there into something particular? So when I think about the method, I feel really sort of primitive in the method that I use, but the method that I use is still really yields and levels that are 6 or 7 times per acre equivalent on the low end. And what then translates into dollar figures is about $1 million per acre conservatively. People wiser than me can double that number. So imagine that $2 million per acre on a school campus where land doesn't cost anything, utilities are already paid for. And you think about the 5,000 acres, what percentage of that land could be used to not only grow food, to feed the students, to combat chronic disease, to go home and through families through a CSA, and also the remaining portion, which is still going to be a significant portion, the rest of that food could be sold into markets where they can pay premium pricing for it. So there I just sort of described a model that is sustainable in every possible way, that actually pays for itself. You have margins, you can afford to pay back investors in a very short time frame and pay fair wages.
Jesse, same question, challenges?
Yeah, I think the biggest impediment to urban agriculture, I guess the other panel kind of touched on this when they handled a question at the end about zoning issues and what had displaced farming before, and I'm sure Rachel can speak to that too. It's difficult financially to find big rectangles of land to farm in the city because you're competing with the other forces that want big rectangles of land, and that's real estate developers and apartment buildings, and the math works better for them for that square footage. Our strategy to overcome that and to build a scalable farm was just to embrace that problem, that constraint, and say, well, can we string together a disaggregated farm? Instead of looking for big rectangles and trying to operate at normal farming scale, the way that most urban ag ventures in 2008, when we looked around, we're trying to do it, we thought, well, what about unlocking the potential for farming in all of the different ornamental landscaping of the city, or in the little bits and pieces and nooks and crannies? If we had a mobile logistics and a labor force of very well-trained professional farmers who are enthusiastic, many of whom have gone through the Master Gardener training program, and we appreciate that resource because they train them up well there. If we put those people to work, almost like the Postal Service logistics or Amazon's logistics, or if you had a mobile force that could arrive and deliver basically farming. What they do is they go from small farm lot to small farm lot throughout the city and deliver the service of farming. Then we could sew together a farm out of everybody's landscapes. And that's what we've done, and it's worked quite well. We're prepared to farm in a home landscape. We can cope with a rooftop. We can cope with some of Los Angeles's incredible slopes. Everything has a cost when it comes to setting up the landscaping maneuvers and doing the installation of infrastructure, but we can cope with any type of site, and we've worked with all different kinds of potential participants, from businesses, like I said, to restaurants. We've built more than 300 such sites, and we maintain more than 100 of those on a weekly basis as our farm field across Los Angeles. And so we're prepared for any dynamic site that we might need to deal with. We're ready for it, and that's how we scale.
Thanks. Yeah, actually, if I could invite Rickey up to the stage. I think he just got here.
All right.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, as soon as you've caught your breath, if you wanted to introduce yourself and how you got started with Urban Green.
I apologize for being late. I'm Rickey Smith with Urban Green. My depth in urban farming began in 1986, actually. I was working for a Fortune 500 company, a well-respected company, Procter & Gamble, in Cincinnati as a brand manager. And my first day on the job was 2 days after graduating from undergraduate school. They had sent my ticket for Cincinnati and couldn't find my home. I lived in a rural area in Tennessee. And this was an inception of people wanting to know the source of their food. And so as a brand manager, it was my job to make sure that we were forward-thinking and moving the product along. And I brought up to my superiors that we should really begin looking at other things other than shelf life and shelf space. We need to be looking at the people that we're serving and that are consuming the products, and that there was no better thing to do during that period to use our urban centers, which were becoming dilapidated and underserved, and no money was being put back into the infrastructure of our urban environments. So I suggested, since we had deep pockets, that they would start a new program of rethinking and reutilizing our cities to grow some of the food stuff, and as a way of giving back as well. It wasn't received at that time. They really didn't care. Their attitude was that Procter & Gamble had been successful long before you arrived, and that you should really just pay attention and repeat, which I understand that perspective, but what it made me realize, and I respected that perspective because it's true, but what it made me realize is that I needed to be in an environment and an organization that was in line with my own personal value system. And so 2 weeks before 9/11, I began what is now Urban Green out of Venice, California. Initial seed money was a $36 investment for me, because that's what I had at the time. And where we are today is we have a 5,000 square foot production facility that we have in a food desert of Sun Valley. Since 2007, we've built 3 urban farms that we operate. And our perspective is to combine the interdisciplines of cuisine, land use, environment, architecture, and make everything into a regenerative process. We want to get beyond sustainability. We feel it's very important that everything be regenerative. So that's our focus. So we seed, we grow, we use urban farming and urban agriculture as a form of urban development. We seek out partners like the state of California that had a dilapidated building and a rundown area in downtown. They approached us in 2007, and we built a small-scale urban farm and raised beds blocks away from City Hall. And then we harvest from there. We bring it to our central kitchens, and we produce products we distribute through the farmers market system, and we also have a contract and an agreement with Whole Foods. The other aspect we do is we bring community there to give them a better understanding of the relationship between themselves and their food supply, and try to give them knowledge so that they can be self-sustaining and grow their own food.
That's great, yeah, and if I could ask one follow-up. You've been in business now for over a decade, which I think makes you the longest tenured entrepreneur up here.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about aspects of your business model, your approach that has allowed you to succeed for that long, especially given that I think there's a lot of aspiring urban farmers out in the audience.
When I began to try to approach people to help me make this happen, it was a lot of ambiguity, and there was a lot of ambiguity because it was really hard to see in 2001 what we were trying to create. And so I soon realized that it was going to be incumbent upon me to get people, create the model so that people can see and can support it. I decided not to go the route of grants. I was well aware of other organizations. I had moved to Los Angeles from Chicago, so I was aware of Will Allen and the initiative of Growing Power in Chicago, and other initiatives in New York City. And I just didn't want to wait. I wanted to create it. So the business model I created was what I wished the Fortune 500 company would have done, is to, I pay for my system by creating value-added products from the food that we grow. That's not really my passion. My passion is urban agriculture, but I needed that to sustain what we do. And so when people spend money with us, it's kind of like a vote, and you're spending money for your values, where I was. And it's a whole aspect of doing wholesale catering. We do a online business, and those different revenue streams all go to support the urban farming.
That's great. Yeah, Rachel, you mentioned earlier that you had been observing urban ag in LA over the past few months for the University of Wisconsin study. I was wondering what you've seen work and what you've seen not work, and if there's any themes.
Well, one of the things I am noticing is that a lot of urban farmers in Los Angeles, they haven't been farmers before, and so they're coming to the business not knowing much about farming, and they're learning through trial and error. And they're also finding out that agriculture is a bit more complicated than they expected, that it's a highly regulated environment, that there's all kinds of barriers that they hadn't anticipated. Our first group talked about those on a larger scale, but urban agriculture faces some of those same regulatory constraints. Dan was at a meeting with me recently where part of the Food Policy Council, where we had someone who's part of the Los Angeles Irrigated Lands group come and talk to our urban ag working group, and I think you were there too, David. And so these folks were finding out for the first time that if you're growing even very small scale commercially in Los Angeles, you need to be part of this Irrigated Lands group, or where you learn how to mitigate runoff from your property when it rains and when you irrigate, so that you're not subject to fines. And there was this shock in the room, like, oh my God, what? I've just got this little urban farm, and you mean to tell me I have to pay this money and be part of this group? And yes, you do. It's a cost of doing business. So there's a number of things, from learning about food safety practices in agriculture, chemical use in agriculture, organic certification and what that means, how to become certified to sell at a certified farmers market. I mean, these are all areas where people are trying to figure it out, and I'm seeing so many places where guidance and support are needed.
Yeah, David, you, like Rachel mentioned, you've been working with the Urban Ag Working Group at the Food Policy Council here in LA. What policy issues really get you fired up and you think are important to unlocking more urban ag?
Well, you mentioned like water issue and the water board, which is its extension of the EPA, and I'm really in favor of environmental protection. And so it's difficult to figure out how to deal with restrictions, government restrictions, and especially in aquaponics. And if you're an urban aquaponicist, you're regulated by like 20 different government bodies, but we also have advantages where so it's not really. I can sort of circumvent the policy anger that I have by building systems that are exempt from the water board issues, because there's no discharge, there is no runoff. So it's the most water efficient way to grow food on the planet, and you could actually be off the water grid too. So you can using rainwater catchment. So anger is what fires me up is turning is by looking at obstacles and turning those into opportunities. And by every measure, aquaponics happens to be the one that makes all of those challenges turn into viable opportunities.
That's great. And then, since we started by talking a little bit about the history of agriculture in LA over the past century, I thought we'd end by talking a little bit about the future of agriculture in LA over the next century. And Jesse, I was wondering what sort of trends you expect to see.
Well, I don't see the food movement and everything that percolates from it stopping. I see it accelerating. People will care more and more about the quality of their food and how it was produced and the the footprint, the environmental footprint of the production process, but especially I think people are going to care about the health consequences of what they eat, and processed food will face some very, very serious challenge from people seeking to eat lots of healthy, lots of more vegetarian and fresher and more delicious produce. Myself, I've done a lot of meat reduction in my own diet, and found that I really enjoy having a tomato sandwich instead of a hamburger, for example, if the tomato is a really well-grown, savory, heirloom black tomato. It tastes almost as delicious and savory as meat might. So I look for substitutions in vegetables that require that vegetables step up and be better than they have been in order for us to cut out some of the meat that you heard the first panel say that we would have to cut out our meat to be efficient enough to feed a rising population in the world. So I expect that, and I expect that also as we start to care more and more about the urban environment, one of the things that we'll want to add back in is agriculture. I think jettisoning it with the Industrial Revolution and as Rachel said, everything that led from World War II through the 80s, where we just kicked agriculture out of the city, I think people are coming to regret that, and that trend won't stop either, that it's more fun and more interesting and more beautiful to have food growing around us. It does something for our hearts and our souls as much as for our diets too, just to have the changing of the seasons signaled by agriculture all around. And so I expect that in the future more and more people will be engaging in different varieties of urban agriculture, asking for it in their home and in their yard or on their rooftop of the multifamily unit that they live in if they don't have a family or single family home. Or just down the block in a community garden or in some sort of market garden that beautifies the neighborhood, reduces crime, and makes everyone happier.
Yeah, Rickey, given that you were a little bit ahead of the curve and starting Urban Green and leaving Procter & Gamble, what kind of trends do you see emerging?
I just see it becoming more common sense and more of a critical mass of people realizing that we have to take control of our own lives and our own food systems. I mean, the fact that there's a trend that populations are moving back to the cities, that's going to create a need for it. The fact that these financial constraints and recessions we haven't put infrastructure back into our country at all, and definitely not into our cities. So I see urban agriculture as a way of revitalizing that aspect, and I see that people seeing that it makes common sense. I think there's going to be a trend where when I started from a heart place, people will see that it makes business sense as well. I think that additionally, Los Angeles is a perfect proving ground, and what I see in Los Angeles is we have these older buildings with thin membranes on their rooftops, but I see hopefully it will become such a critical mass that developers will be thinking more forward-thinking and start developing roofs that can hold the weight of an urban farm. I see people wanting to source their food more and know where it's coming, and will be able to know that the food is coming from their particular region or even their city. Another trend that I hope takes place is that, and will continue, is already taking place, is that people will take more active role in learning about agriculture and growing food. Rachel was talking about novices, that we're all novices, and one of the things that I like to say is that I'm up here on this panel with people I've admired. David, I've been trying to meet him for over a year.
2 years.
2 years. And and the most important thing is that I'm not an expert. It has been trial and error. I can say today that I am an urban farmer because I had my first loss this year. There was a little bit of arrogance because for the last 6 years I've been growing crops and hadn't had a real issue. But I had a Bagrata heirloom bug infestation this year. And this little bug that I thought was so cute, I recognized it because I'm paying attention. I saw it 3 months before it devastated me. And we're doing everything organically, so we take it around from farmer to farmer at the farmer's market, and no one could identify it. Finally, the San Diego Master Gardener sent out an alert, and by that time I was infested. And crops that I've had, trees, I have collard green and kale trees that I've had for 6 years, were being destroyed in a matter of 10 days. And I had to fight that. And, it was the first time that I admitted I actually cried because I didn't know what to do. And I had invested so much of my energy and time in it. So I called UC Davis, I called the Ag Extension, and they were there to give me help. And they said, consult your local master gardener. So we, having that experience humbled me. It made me realize that, there's a lot that I didn't know, and I didn't know anything till I experienced the loss of putting your time, your sweat, your money into something, and seeing a 2-centimeter insect destroy it.
Yeah. Rachel, can you talk a little bit about resources through UC or elsewhere that can help when people are going through that learning process?
Yes. We have a system in California and throughout the U.S. too, through our land grant organizations and universities and cooperative extension. In some states they call it extension agents. Here in California we call them farm advisors. Because our resources are now stretched so thin, we don't have necessarily one in every county, but we do have a farm advisor in Los Angeles County, Andre Viscaro, who works with the farmers, the commercial farmers out in the high desert, but he's becoming, as he and I connect over this urban farming issue, he'll become more available to help down here as well. Another great resource is the University of California Small Farm Program. They have tons of great publications. They're not necessarily geared towards urban farmers, they're geared towards small farmers, but the issues are overlapping. They're almost identical in many ways, and they've got great publications online, and you can look for that at UC Small Farm Center. Also, UC's IPM program, fantastic resources about emerging pests. I don't think they got the Bagrata bug info up there soon enough to help Rickey, unfortunately. But we have a group of scientists in UC, and as they see these pest issues emerging, they write up information that anybody can use on how do you control this pest. So those are just a few that come to mind.
Well, that's a great list. Does anyone have anything to add to that list? I think that was pretty thorough.
Well, as far as things that are going to devastate urban farming, you mean?
Well, that too.
It's a really long list. And I got an investor asked me why would I want to give you money, because there's no need for it, and I say, well, there is no need, but there's a demand, and the demand is on the rise. So we should definitely build farms. But the farms, though, that urban farming will always be a little bit different than even if it's organic, but commercial farming, and because there is a lot more risk of growing food in the city. You have to be out of your mind to be a farmer of any kind in this planet, and aquaponics is even higher risk, and urban aquaponic farming of any type is the most risky thing you can imagine, but it is also the most important thing we can do with our assets and with our time, and is how we invest, because it is the solution that can actually feed us. With the wisdom of the green thumbs of the world, we can choose our varieties carefully. They can be heirloom varieties that are tolerant to the molds, which in many cases are more devastating than some of the pests or the viruses that come out, the bacteria that can affect our plants. It's actually really scary when you dive into some of the details. Like, it's how we're even possible to grow food in this world, and you can see that how the green evolution even exploded. But I think it's an all hands on deck approach, using every resource we have, technology and knowledge base, to be able to make this work.
That's great. I think we have about 10 minutes left, so I think this is a great time to open it up to questions if anyone in the audience wants to ask some of our panelists. And I think, as before, just line up behind the microphones in the aisles.
Questions for Rachel. I'd like to have you talk more specifically about the food preservation part of your program, because I think with sustainable agriculture and urban growing, it's important to know that how to preserve some of the foods that you're actually growing in the event. Like Jesse said, that 2 hours after it's picked, it can be cooked, but sometimes busy schedules dictate that some of that stuff has to be preserved. And so when you're growing, it's better to flavor-wise to contain some of that. Most people these days don't have the concept on how to preserve what they're growing.
We have a great Master Food Preserver volunteer program in Los Angeles County. They have a page on our website. They have a Facebook page. They love to answer questions about food preservation, and they go out and give public demonstrations. And I think one of them is in the audience today. I know I saw Sarah Spitz. There she is in the back. She's one of our Master Food Preservers. So feel free to ask her food preservation questions. But I also want to say that that's an important issue when it comes to creating value-added products. One of the ways that small farmers stay in business, like Rickey said, is you have value-added products, and food preservation is a great way to address that. And recently a state law was passed that makes it more flexible to do to create certain products in your home kitchen and be able to sell them. So that's something that we're progressing with in California.
That's great. Let's take one from the microphone on the left.
Hi. So I'm curious to know your guys' opinion on the public's interaction with urban agriculture. I kind of see three different ways they interact. One is they just support, that type of product and they purchase directly from those farms. There's another model where the public is actually paying someone to come and farm the ground for them. And then there's, the other idea that these farms are actually, feeding the normal production system. What are your guys' opinions on the vision of, how this integrates with society?
It's a grounding issue. I've given farm tours to thousands of people, and it happens to be, for most people and don't know what aquaponics is, their jaw drops when they see that this thing is growing that much food in that little space, and it's, that's agritourism, I guess. But there's an immediate connection to something new and futuristic, and then the deal is closed when they actually grab a sample of something and they smell and taste it, and it's impossible to not go wow when you don't rip the basil off or have a bite of celery for the first time out of an aquaponics system.
I think that you can employ a combination of the three that you mentioned. I think that at this point, in this juncture, until there is, more capital being spent and more risk taken being given to innovative people, that you have to use many different methods. And we're talking about what is the future. I see the future of organizations like Seedstock bringing people together that have knowledge and that work so hard may not be able to connect, and connecting them to do this. And so I think the three that you mentioned should be in combination, and that's what we're trying to employ.
Yeah, if I understand the question, I guess I would say generically there's a little bit of a tension between volume and quality. That those are some of the main trade-offs you consider as you start to set up a farm operation. And when we think about how to do urban agriculture and what its purpose is, that's one of the things on our mind when you weigh what scale, what size of infrastructure, or what kind of budgets you want to allocate to it. If you want to grow a whole lot of volume and very consistent product, kind of like the tomato grower this morning was talking about, specializing, going all in, and putting millions of dollars of capital into one thing that just cranks tomatoes and tomatoes and tomatoes. He knows everything about it. That's probably like the big rectangles I'm talking about, and he might find, I know that there's been a lot of success in large rectangles producing tons and tons of tomatoes or tons and tons of salad greens in hydroponic, maximally efficient, high output facilities on top of supermarkets. And that's one interesting model that I think the consumer has been lining up for in cases where they can get a fresher salad. But then on the other hand, there's a whole lot of dance with flavor and maximum freshness that I think can only happen in the very small plots. And I think that's a whole different thing that people will show up to grow the absolute best tasting, very low shelf life fruits and vegetables in polycultural gardens, and they can find slots in the city that are much, much tinier, and they don't need to allocate budgets for enormous mega machines that look like they belong in a carnival in order to grow that kind of food, and that's a different form of urban agriculture, and they kind of find different spots depending on what the space is, what the neighborhood is, and what the budget is.
Just one quick follow-up to that. I have two kids. My oldest is 20 months. And whenever something exciting happens to him, he does this really exciting full-body shake. It's just full-body happiness. And I've noticed that people who come to my farm stand, who know that I'm there, and not just stumbled upon me, but actually customers who are coming to see me, they come with the same kind of shake. And that's the testimonial of all testimonies for me.
To the right.
Hi, my name is Adrian, and first off, hey guys, thank you for what you do and thanks for sharing your experiences. Having just moved to LA 3 months ago from New York, I really want to talk about rooftop agriculture, a type of farming that's emerging out of the East Coast in places like Gotham Greens in Brooklyn and more vertically structured cities like Chicago. In 2007, the Department of Environmental Affairs in LA released a report on cooling Los Angeles through green roofs. Since then, that department has been closed due to budget cuts. So I'm wondering how, as agripreneurs, do we reignite that traction for that movement? And also, I was wondering, Jesse, you said that you guys have systems that are usually 1.5 feet of soil. Are you having problems with structural integrity of the buildings in Los Angeles, being that these buildings are designed to withstand earthquakes? And how do you plan on tackling that? Thank you.
First question first. Very excited about green roof technology. That's something that Farmscape thinks about a lot because we believe in the value of the cooling effect, like you said, and also of sewing together a network for pollinators. And like the more we green and soften the city with more soil, that's real soil, and more good, vigorous growing plants, that just does good things for the biome. And if you're going to invest in a green roof, it's my thinking, biased though it might be, that that tends to be a larger investment, especially when you're talking about renovating roofs to create the support structure. You might as well go all the way to an edible green roof, I think. Now, circumstances always vary, and sometimes maybe you can only have enough soil, or you've only got the budget or whatever for non-edibles, which can tend to be cheaper for maintenance because they don't grow vigorously. But the more that we can eat our roofs in Los Angeles, I feel like that's then not only better for our diets and all the reasons that I advocate for Farmscape or other urban agriculture all the time, but it will also make the city form, the urban form, much better. It'll be better for our biology. That's cool. I don't know what we can do to reignite it, except everybody in this room should go tell everybody else, care about this issue. Let's have green roofs. Let's have green edible roofs. And as for the 1.5 foot soil problem on a rooftop, in the only rooftop project we've done where we used our standard size beds, it was fortunate. The only reason we could do that was because it was on top of a parking garage, and it was a space that was designed for intensive use. If you're renovating a roof that isn't on top of a parking garage, then you've usually got to cope with lower weight constraints and shallower soil, and there's ways to adapt to that too. Typically, you can't grow like deep-rooted root crops, or you might have to sacrifice growing deep-rooted tomatoes, or maybe that's when you start to think about aquaponics and hydroponic systems instead of growing in soil. In soil with 4 to 6 inches, you can turn over crops of leafy greens and all kinds of other things, but it just reduces down the number of different things you can think about.
I'd like to add something to that. The reason I think it's so different between New York and LA in terms of the green roof, vegetable gardening, and urban roof farming movement is because we've still got more vacant open land here in Los Angeles, and we're not as dense as Manhattan or one of the other boroughs. So there's more opportunities to garden or farm in the ground here, and that has lower startup costs. So I think as the city becomes more dense, you'll see more projects like that, but I think that's a big difference as to why we do less of that here.
That's great. Yeah, one last note from Rickey, and then we'll break for lunch.
speaking of what Rachel says, I think one of the things you can do is work with the LA Food Policy Council, the working groups, to try to create some legislation through that. Like I said, I've been doing this 11 years, and what the Food Policy Council and the working groups have been able to do to change allowing you to bake bread in your home is amazing, because it's something that I was fighting alone to do for years. So having said that, with the rooftop gardens and edible green roofs, their savings from water runoff, there's business savings, water runoff, cooling the building. So I think that we should encourage our legislators to start giving tax credits because for those green roofs, because there are beneficial business, hardcore business reasons for doing so.
Excellent. Thanks, Ricky. So it's time to break for lunch. I think our panelists will stick around because it seems like a few other people had questions. And let's thank the panelists one more time.